because everybody has a different flavor.
Great.
Okay,
we are live, ladies and gentlemen. So let's come back. We are looking at continuing, for those of you who are watching, continuing our walkthrough of a series of bills. Thank you, Senator Hardy, for jumping in and talking to us about S-220 and our alleged counsel, Tucker Anderson, I believe.
Yes, he was just
great.
in my committee, so he's
great. He's going that way.
Yeah.
Terrific. But I have the utmost confidence that you'll be able to tell us the ins and outs of this bill.
Okay.
So whatever you'd like to share, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am, for the record, Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District. And well, as you might recall, Mr. Chair, I don't think anyone else in the room was here, but during COVID, or just before COVID, I introduced a bill to create a status of libraries working group, because I started in this committee. I sat right here where Senator Williams was, and I met the state librarian who was a super dynamic guy, Jason, and I'm blanking on Broughton. Jason Broughton
has left, right?
Yeah, he now works for the National Archives, I believe, and runs their ABLE program that for people with disabilities accessing library and archive materials. He was a great guy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I really want to work with librarians and libraries to figure out what's going on with libraries in the state of Vermont. I'm a huge library fan. I come from a family that uses libraries and always has. Some of my fondest childhood memories are of libraries and going to get books with my mom on Saturday morning. And I had a dear aunt who was a librarian for 60 years, ran a branch library in Rochester, New York. So I have a lot of really fond memories of libraries. And then when I moved to Vermont with my kids, I spent a lot of time in our library in Middlebury. So we developed a bill to create the Status of Libraries Committee, Mr. Broughton and I. And the bill was supposed to be read on the floor on Friday, March 13th, 2020. But instead, we shut down the State House and everybody went home. So then when the next session, we came back and you were chairing the committee, and you all, I don't know who else was on the committee at that time, put that language into a miscellaneous education committee bill and created a Status of Libraries working group. Yeah, he was sitting there. So that working group worked for 2 years to do a really in-depth status of libraries. We had a lot of subcategories about what they were supposed to report back to us on, about facilities, about staffing, about community resources and programming, about their collections, about electronics and technology, all this huge amount of stuff. They worked very diligently. Jason started the program, then he left to go work at the Federal Archives. They were interim librarian, and then the new state librarian, Catherine Del Neo, who you probably have had in here at some point, or will have her in, has finished it off, and it included librarians from local public libraries, from school libraries, and from academic libraries, from colleges and universities. So all kinds of libraries. And of course the state library. And they produced a report that came out November 1st. Here is a hard copy of it. They gave me this because I created them, sort of, with all of you. And it's 910 pages long, but 700 of them is an appendix with lots of public comments and lots of additional information. Tucker has it all completely memorized, I'm sure of it. But in that are a series of recommendations for legislative action, which is what we ultimately asked them for. And so S-220, the bill before you, is the bill that would implement many of their recommendations, not all of them, but many of their recommendations. And you should certainly obviously hear from the state librarian who chaired the committee, and other members of the committee, and
Who's that now? Just out of curiosity.
It's Catherine Del Neo.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
She's great.
That's right.
She can talk to you in depth. I also would recommend, they did a webinar for librarians a few weeks ago and they recorded it if you're interested in listening to the webinar, and they have a slide deck from that which you can probably bring to you. And then there was a really good Vermont Edition interview with her and a couple other librarians in December that I can send you the link to, that was really helpful to listen to about this report and what they had hoped to accomplish with it. Tucker will walk you through all the language in the bill, but I'll just sort of give you an overview of some of the provisions and then leave it to him to tell you the details. But so there's a lot of findings and intent in the bill, and many of those are just sort of setting out the sort of values of Vermont and its access to libraries and its values of Vermont libraries, and tried to cover all three types of libraries, the general types, the public libraries, the school libraries, and the academic libraries, and really setting out the sort of values of, principles of the First Amendment. And Tucker can explain a little bit more about why this is really important, but this is really setting the stage for some of the provisions in the bill, establishing the state's values for information, intellectual freedom, use of libraries, access to materials, and that sort of public access to things. And then that is in the intent to protect libraries and why. So one of the first provisions is about licensing of electronic literary products, or ebooks, and as they're sort of commonly known. And libraries often, their contracts for ebooks are often really expensive and limiting for libraries. So this not only is protecting libraries, it also, for those of you who might want to consider the fiscal, this saves money because libraries are basically paying for ebooks, and then they're getting a limit on the number of times they can loan that ebook out. Even though it's an electronic thing, they're being told you can only loan this out X number of times, and then they have to rebuy it, even though it's electronic. So this would create contracting provisions, and Tucker can explain a little bit more because there's been some complicated court cases about it. But that's what the section 2 of the bill is about: ebook licensing and contracts, and that actually goes on for a little bit. And then there is section, did I skip something? There's then there are provisions about book bans. This is something that we've seen in lots of parts of the country, not as much in Vermont, but a couple times, about people wanting to ban books from libraries for various reasons. And this would not establish a ban on book bans, which is what some people wanted, but this would establish process and procedures and values around how to handle conversations about book bans. And I really encourage you to talk to librarians about this, because they were really clear that they did not want to ban book bans, but they wanted to have a framework in order to consider and discuss and approach and sort of solve the issues around book bans. So they can speak to it much more articulately than me.
I think we might have a bill from Senator Chittenden on this also.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, actually don't know his bill, but Senator Gulick was also working on a bill about that, and this language was what was the sort of agreed upon language, I believe, that's in this bill. There's also some provisions about access and confidentiality of library records that really brings us into the national standards for the age of patrons for whom their library records are confidential. And this brings us in line with the 12 years standard, which is what it is, the standard nationally. And again, the librarians can tell you a lot more about this. It does create a position at the Agency of Education for a school library consultant, which is a position that was eliminated a number of years ago. and school libraries are having a really hard time because they don't have a person at AOE to help them, and when they have questions or concerns or need assistance or need to know what the standards are or need to deal with a collections issue, they have nobody at AOE, so this would create a position. That was one of their recommendations. All of these were recommendations in the report. There's training and education for staff, and this would create a certificate of public librarianship that would be part of the functions of the Department of Libraries, so that this could be a sort of essentially a professional development tool for the Department of Libraries for librarians. There's also language about public safety in our libraries, and this really brings the public libraries statutes into line with what are the public safety provisions for schools. So it makes them equivalent about how to keep public libraries safe in the same way that we keep schools safe regarding drugs, alcohol, and dangerous weapons and firearms. There are some provisions about library governance starting on page 13, and this clarifies a lot of the library governance. Some of our libraries are municipal libraries, and some of them are actually privately incorporated public libraries. It's kind of a weird thing. They're not technically part of the town government. They are operated by a library board, but it gets a little squirrely because sometimes towns have, library boards and they have select boards, and it's unclear who the library director reports to or who oversees the budget. So this is actually clarifying a lot of the municipal statutes around library governance, and this would be really helpful for a lot of towns. Yes, I have towns that get confused about this all the time. And then this also gives the Department of Libraries the express authority to develop standards by rule. Right now, they don't have rulemaking authority, and so they don't have the ability to develop library standards for public libraries. And they really would like to be able to, so that libraries can sort of come up to the 21st century together. And this would give them the express authority to do so. They thought they would be able to do this just on their own, but as Tucker and I discovered, they actually never got the authority to do rulemaking, and so this would give them that authority. And then finally, at the end of the bill, it does provide some funding for the Department of Libraries, $275,000 to the department, and then $225,000 for 2 library consultants to add some staffing so that they can carry out the duties of this bill. In their report, they have a huge laundry list of things that they would love in their dream world to have funding for. They were in the position where they had to say, we support the governor's budget. So I came up with this level of funding to give them something so that they could carry out the bill. But I'll leave it to you to dig into that a little bit more. There also is a huge section of the report, and part of their recommendations was about data privacy. And this is a really complicated issue that is not included in this bill, because it is my understanding that there is already a separate bill that I think is right now in House Commerce, I believe, that is about data privacy more broadly, that is in the same kind of framework as recommended by the librarians. And so I didn't tackle that in the bill because it was really complicated and would have made the bill, I think, 3 times longer. So Tucker can tell you a little bit more about that, but it is sort of it's a separate bill that probably won't come here. I don't know where it will go, but it's being handled in Commerce at this point. So that is what is in this bill. As you can tell, I'm very excited about it. I really hope that you guys will spend some time and report it out favorably and have a lot of fun with librarians who really want to tell their stories to you.
Do you have a total cost for this?
So I believe that the final appropriation for the Department of Libraries is $500,000 for the positions and the funding, and then the library consultant for the the Agency of Education is, how much should we put in here, Tucker?
$112,000.
So it's a little over $600,000 is in the bill.
And is that a fiscal note from joint fiscal, or those sort of your numbers?
Those were sort of the numbers
Yep.
that we came up with. I'm sure joint fiscal could, hone them and
Yep.
you can talk to them. I mean, I think the Department of Libraries is a little bit hamstrung because they have to say, we're supportive of the line.
Completely.
So, but I do feel like they need some positions and funding to be able to carry out some of the things in this bill, and frankly, to be able to support our public libraries better and to do more for libraries in the state. The libraries, I mean, if you take a look at this report, which is online, there's so much that our libraries do that are beyond the scope of what we sort of think of libraries, and they did a lot during the pandemic for access
Sure.
to the internet. During, they're often the safest place in town for people to go during disasters. They are often, giving out clean, socks and, safe supplies and things like that. They are often just the last resort for so many people and crucial for a lot of our really small towns. So, anything we can do to support libraries and help them with their mission, I think is
Have
great.
we lost libraries? Do you know how many libraries have closed over the past decade?
That is a good question. I don't know. I think that we have lost libraries. I think we've reduced the number of hours so that there may still be a
Right.
physical library building in in communities, but it's only open like 6 hours a
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
A lot of them have part-time librarians. The
Yeah.
librarians are usually, very underpaid. And for some towns, it's all they have. They don't have anything else but a library
Right.
there. And it's really important to, bring them back to life, I feel like.
Singular.
I don't know if every library has this, but Burlington, we have the Library of Things, which is so
Oh,
cool
yes.
because they will loan out gardening equipment and kitchen utensils
You
and
have to have something like that.
appliances. It's very
It's
cool.
not just Burlington.
Yeah, it's not just.
Okay.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
knowledge is
I know.
of Burlington.
Snowshoes,
Yeah, right.
ski passes,
Yeah, yeah,
tools.
yeah.
It's a really big thing. Or they have, in the kids' library, they often have backpacks that are sort of like mixed with games and different things for kids to take out a backpack full of kind of cool surprises and stuff. So
Senator
yeah, it's
Sheen.
great.
Just thank you for this bill. Just one thing to flag, I imagine with section 9 and 10, which involves criminal threatening and firearms, probably take a pass through judiciary, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. One flag.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
thank you for flagging that. Senator Williams.
So I'm just thinking, it may apply to Senator Shane's district too, but in my community, we have a lot of people from New York State, who live around the border.
Yep.
Actually come, when they come looking, the town manages the budget and allocates the money for them to operate. They come looking for more money, and of course, when, tight budget year, they're like, well, why don't you stop, tell the people from New York State they can't come there, they won't do it. It's like, so it's, I don't know if you could do anything about that legislatively, but they also, I think they have to belong to the Vermont State Libraries Association. You know anything about that?
That I would ask the state librarian about. I don't know. There is a library association and you should have them in to talk to you as well. In terms of the, libraries don't turn anybody away. Often you have to have a library card to get something, and those library cards, sometimes there's a fee to get a library card. It is true that, sort of regional libraries often have people who don't technically pay to help support the library who have access. We have, I'm sure this is true in all of your districts, but some of the larger towns have the library, and people from the smaller towns come and use those libraries even though their taxpayer money isn't funding them. So that's an issue. I mean, in a lot of states, they have regional library districts actually, and then branch libraries, so a library system. So we could contemplate something like the, Wyndham County library system, and all the libraries are branch libraries of it, and it's funded at the county level. Something, as GovOps chair, we think about how to make government work a little bit better, and that's something to consider. But it's definitely an issue, and your community's not alone in that. And it's a tough nut to crack because you don't want to turn people away.
Sure.
But it's also difficult to fund a good library.
Yes, are we
Is the library report link in the package for today? No.
I can send it on to you guys
Yeah, if you
later
send
It would be
today.
helpful
and,
to
um,
kind of group all this together.
Yeah, I can send you a bunch of links. I got lots of links, and I can give you a list of reference of witnesses that I would suggest. But definitely, I mean, have your own librarians and from your communities because they all know about this. They're enthusiastic. They want to see libraries get some attention. I mean, that was part of what I wanted to do was just give libraries this sort of their day in the building or their session in the building where they get to really talk about why they're important to our communities.
Other questions for Senator Hardy at this point? Great, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you
Thank
taking the
you.
time, especially last minute.
My pleasure, and thank you
Mr.
for
Anderson,
doing
you
the
wanna
bell.
join us at the table for a few minutes and just give us some highlights, things that haven't been covered?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Take care.
very much.
Bye, Tucker.
All right, thank you for having me back again, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel, and thank you for being merciful with the option to do the high-level overview.
Well, I think
So-
she kind of gave us a good
Great background, excellent. Working our way from the beginning of the bill, I'm gonna skip past the findings and intent, not because they aren't important, but because they are, and they are supposed to be an expression of the findings of the General Assembly. So as you move forward with the bill, take a look through each one of the subdivisions that articulates a particular finding and make sure that it is an accurate representation of what the General Assembly has found on this matter. Move to page 4, where there is the expression of intent. Senator Hardy flagged it, but there is legal significance to this. This is what a court would use to interpret all of the various provisions in this bill if it needed to be reviewed. And there are some controversial components of this that could be subject to judicial scrutiny in the future. So some of the important pieces of intent here, right at the beginning, the intent to protect libraries from contract and trade practices that interfere with libraries' duties and core missions. That is the one that has been tested the most frequently over the last couple of years. And it speaks directly to the first set of operative sections that I will highlight for you, and that is the licensing of electronic literary products. So that's page 4 in section 2. And I believe it goes all the way to section 4, but we will get there. The high-level overview of this background, this has been passed in a few other states, not this language, but similar proposals. It has been challenged under both constitutional grounds and under the U.S. copyright law. And in a few states, including in Maryland, the statutes have been overturned and are not effective at this time. This language attempts to thread a very fine line here that makes sure that it is not interfering with copyright holders' rights to sell and market their material as they see fit, but that would also restrict any contract that has what is being deemed here an unenforceable provision that would interfere, for example, this is built into the section, with the library's ability to loan materials without limits on, for example, time or the number of licenses that could be issued to individual users. If you'd like me to get into detail in the section now, I can. That's kind of the high-level view, is that this would establish unenforceable contract provisions that would be deemed under the law unfair and deceptive trade practices.
I
So
think we're gonna have to have you back to dig into this.
that would be enforced by the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, when you come back, I don't know if we've got time today, but if you could go over, in the definitions, digital, audiobooks, electronic book,
Absolutely.
okay.
We'll get into all of that. The electronic literary products is kind of a broad term there, but yeah, it would cover everything from your Libby audiobook to your ebooks, things like that. From what I understand, there are even digital materials. Like if you've ever been to the library and seen a display about books, they can even do that in a digital format. The next big section of the bill, Senator Hardy highlighted, bottom of page 7. This is the selection and retention of library materials. Locally, think of this as policies around book bans. And what this sets up is first a requirement that public libraries will adopt a selection and retention policy for library materials, that the Department of Libraries would adopt essentially a standard or model policy that could be used by the local libraries. And the intent here is that you would have First Amendment compliant procedures at every public library, where if a material was under consideration for removal from the library, it would first have to pass through the procedures established in the policy before it could be removed. And that is also something where you can get into a lot more detail, particularly around some of the different models that have been presented and if there are any constitutional concerns. Okay, continuing on, I'm on page 9 now. Next section of the bill dealing with the confidentiality of library records. Under current law, library patron records are deemed confidential. That includes from access under the Public Records Act, and that is for any library patron who is 16 years of age or older under current law. This would amend that provision to lower that age to 12 years of age. So any library patron who is 12 years or older has the right to confidential library records.
Is there a problem we're trying to solve here?
I'm not aware of the policy behind this. That would probably be a better question for the sponsor or some of the advocates in this area. And when you do get one of Senator Hardy's many links that includes the report from the working group, there is some discussion within the report about the merits for lowering the age to 12 versus some of the opinions.
Can you just distribute those to you
Yeah, definitely.
as to why it's the sort of why it's in here?
Yeah. You want me to speak to
Yeah,
it?
yeah, sorry.
So, because I was a librarian, as you all know, sometimes students are not necessarily students, but they go to the public library, they want to access information on a topic that might be sensitive. And this allows them to be, to do it without fear of in private, I guess is what I'm,
Yeah.
so privately accessing information that could be helpful to them that they may feel uncomfortable divulging to someone else.
It was some specific parents.
Right. That's someone, that's.
So
comes up
12
with
years old
someone.
is now worse.
I was middle school grade, so, yeah.
Okay, please continue. And we have 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay.
Yep, I might have to.
So I shouldn't tell stories about my public library that I went to as a child. Got it. Okay. The Section 7 establishes a library consultant position at the Agency of Education. This is spoken to specifically in the report if you want background details, but essentially it is a position in the agency that would be coordinating with public libraries, material selection, policies, things of that nature. On page 10, training and education for library staff. The department currently has a certificate in public librarianship program. This is codifying that program, putting it in the law, and saying that they are going to continue it and adding it essentially to their duties and functions. It is their credit system is interesting. I think it's 250 credits is what's required to get to that point.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that. I know that I'm being recorded on YouTube, but don't quote me on it. So under the public safety section, section 9 and 10, as Senator Hardy pointed out, this is adding public libraries and public library grounds to some of the statutes that cover public safety issues for public schools. That would include the carrying of a firearm on school grounds. This would include public library and public library grounds in there. There's a notable exception that is built in section 10, by the way. Sorry if I moved too fast. From page 11 to page 12. That is if it is permitted by the governing body, trustees, managers, or directors of a public library, then a firearm can be carried onto the public library grounds for specific occasions or for instructional or other specific purposes. This is also built in for public schools. For your
Fire safety class would be a good.
Okay, page 13, library governance. Senator Hardy did an excellent job of explaining what this section is doing. It is eliminating some of the overlapping authority where both the select board and the library board of library trustees, for example, have simultaneous authority over a library director. And this sets it so that the governing body of the library has supervision and control over the library director, not the legislative bodies of municipalities. Moving on to page 16, big piece here relating to, in section 16, the rules that will be adopted governing minimum standards for Vermont public libraries. There are currently minimum standards for libraries adopted by rule and approved by LCAR from 1987. The intent was to update them this year. However, when I researched whether they had ever been empowered by the General Assembly to adopt rules, there was no session law, there was no statute. It appeared as though it was adopted because, according to those rules, it had no force of law. So it was it went through the administrative rulemaking process, was brought before an LCAR and passed its way through. And my assumption, this is not specifically researched, is that it passed through because there was no force of law attached to the rules. It was more like a guidance document than it was an actual rule. So here this codifies it, grants them the authority to adopt those minimum standards. Again, something to get into detail in the future. Section 17 carries the appropriations. Senator Hardy did the math very kindly for me. $500,000 to the Department of Libraries to achieve the purposes of the bill, to add staff, $112,500 to the Agency of Education. Those figures you will likely want to have fiscal analysts look at. There are a number of assumptions built into it based on the median salary of similar positions in those agencies in the Department of Libraries, what the cost benefits would be. You'll likely want to hear some financial specifics about that so that it isn't the government operations attorney making radical
Right, we'll send it
assumptions.
to Joe. Any questions at this point? Of course, we'll dig in a lot deeper, but I think that's very helpful. Great, thank you. Committee, gonna give us 10 minutes to get ready. We have the chair of the state board coming in. We have a packet in front of us if anybody wants to take a look at it. This is to update us on the search for the Secretary of Education.